Okay, we're going to go ahead and start the October meeting of the Bona Basin Historical Society. We are doing this meeting Zoom only. We had originally planned on doing the hybrid meeting, but our air is pretty bad outside. It's almost like you could chew it if you went outside. It's so bad. So we decided to do Zoom only tonight, and we're going to do just a few announcements, and then we'll go from there with our presentation. I wanted to let everyone know that next month our meeting will be the Energetic and Amazing McTarnahan, and that's going to be presented by Chris Spiller. And then in December, we've got Lundy, California, Life in a Mining Town, 1880 to 1940. And that's going to be presented by Linda LaPierre. And then next month, I'll have a couple of them into next year that I'll be able to give you the names of. If you would like to give a presentation, or if you know of anyone that would like to give a presentation, please let us know. Either call me or send an email to curator@monobasinhistory.org. And even if you're out of town, we can do them via Zoom. And we sure appreciate it. Everyone loves having our monthly presentations. As far as our museum operations go, we closed the museum the last Sunday in September. And throughout the summer, we had 2,455 visitors. And they were from 33 states. And even with the COVID restrictions, we had people from 4 different countries. We had Australia, Germany, France, and Taiwan. And again, many, many thanks to all of the volunteers that worked this summer. We couldn't have kept the museum open without the folks that worked the museum. The Conway Ranch Historic Corps statement of work that I had turned in to the county, a project request form. We received notice back from the county today that they said that the project review committee found that the proposed restoration project has a few noteworthy issues that caused the project to score low during this review cycle. The PRC looks at projects based on specific criteria, which includes funding secured, consistency with the strategic plan, design needed, shovel ready, and whether the project is mandated. Some of the issues with our project requests identified with the restoration project as currently proposed include that the funding isn't secured, and the scope of the work will need to be translated into a plan package so that we could get permitting, and there is no state or federal mandate for this work. The Project Review Committee also considered that the strategic plan has set priorities that aren't highly related to this project. Future work to address funding and plans, permitting, etc., should be reviewed to improve the project's potential and rating in another review cycle. So I think what it comes down to, unless we have $103,000, I don't think this is going to happen. I think that we need to, this is with HistoriCorps doing the work. And most of the work is most of the dollars is project management fees. So I'd sure like to hear from anyone as far as another approach that we could possibly take to save some of these ranches that need help to keep from falling down when we don't have $100,000+. So if anybody has any great ideas, please email, call, or speak up. because we could sure use some ideas of what ways to go there. So that's about it on that for right now. The other thing I just wanted to point out to everyone, I really, really want to thank Rich Foy. Without his audio visual expertise, we wouldn't be able to have the hybrid meetings that we've had. And, you know, he records these Zoom meetings, gets them put up on YouTube, and none of that would be possible without Rich. And I believe he was in Rhode Island this morning. And so it really is greatly appreciated. And he does it all really quietly. So thank you so much, Rich.
Barry McPherson, you unmuted yourself a minute ago. Did you have a question you wanted asked?
No, I didn't. Sorry, I'll mute myself.
Oh, no problem. I'm just real fast with the mute button during these. Okay.
All righty. So we're going to go ahead and get right to our presentation. I'm really excited. And, you know, Bob Marks has been very gracious to do this for us on Zoom. Back when we asked him if he would do a presentation, he said, yes, but I really want to do one in person instead of on Zoom. And here we were at the last minute going, Bob, we're going to change. And he just went along, and we sure appreciate it. So tonight we're going to have, Bob's going to present Settlers, Paiutes, and Developers in the Bona Basin, 1872 to 1930, evidence from government land office records and court cases. And so we're ready if you're ready, Bob and Rich.
Yeah, so Rich, what we need to do here, right, is I need to share a screen and get my presentation up and going. I hope that when we do this, that all of you in Zoom land out there will see my face over there on the right-hand side, and anybody else who Rich wants to put over there as well. Before we do that, among the reasons why I wanted to do this in person is because I get a lot of feedback from the audience, whether it's a class or a lecture or whatever it is I'm doing. And so doing these things on Zoom, my eyes are going to wander over this way. You know, you're going to think I'm not connecting with you, but I'm trying. The other thing is that I'm a lot more animated in person than I can be being stuck to a chair in front of a camera. You know, I walk around, I wave my arms, I do this, I do that, you know, so, you know, I do this and my arms disappear. So I'm just asking you to, you know, imagine me being in person. It could be better. And maybe at some point we'll be able to do it again. So Rich, why don't we try to get this up and going? Shall I do share screen first? Is that what we're doing?
And
okay.
Folks, while the screen's getting up, I just wanted to remind everyone that if you have any questions, to please put them into the chat, and then we'll go over those at the end of the presentation.
Okay, Rich, what does it look like? We seeing everything? Does it all look good? I've got you and Robin and Vanita and Barry on the right side. Rich, you are, now unmute yourself. There you go.
Let's see, we have two screens, so I'm going to see it a little differently. Robin, would you chime in as to just what you're seeing?
Yes, what I'm seeing is I have my view set to side by side with the speaker. So Bob, the only person that I see right now is Rich because he's the host. But as soon as you start to speak, I will see you in my screen. Okay, so
I'm speaking now. Can you see me or?
Yes. Now you're the only person that I see. I see you and I see the presentation. Okay,
so when we finish, Rich, I'm just going to need your help so that I can put all of the people in Zoom land up there on the screen so we can see who's doing what. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to try to keep track of time here, and I think this will probably be me talking and maybe waving my arms around. And I have a laser pointer here that doesn't work on the screen, but imagine a bit laser pointer. I've got a very large cursor, so we can probably use that as well. So before I start, I just want to say that what I'm talking about tonight, which deals with settlers, Paiutes, and developers in the Bona Basin up to about 1930, is part of a larger project that I'm engaged in. I started out thinking that what I would be doing is an environmental history of the Eastern Sierra. Several years ago, I started working on it, and because I live in June Lake, I started working on the Bona Basin. And now the Bona Basin is taking up nearly all of my time and energy. And this is the second of what will probably be a 4 or 5 part environmental history of the Bona Basin. The first part I presented last year at the Eastern Sierra History Conference put on by the ESIA. And that takes the story up to about 1900 or so, using the sources that I had available then. And what a very simple model of environmental history is that it deals with the way in which natural environments condition the way in which people, societies, and groups can, in fact, inhabit and then settle in a land, in an environment, and the way in which they then get their sustenance from it changes that environment. And then the changed environment, in consequence, requires changes in human societies as well. It's a very simple model. It gets very much more complicated when you include things like attitudes and institutions and values and everything else. But it's an interactive model. So this is actually part of that environmental history. And what I'm looking at this time is largely what happens to land and then water in the first part of the 20th century. As I said, the first part, which has been published, by the way, in the Eastern Sierra History Journal, which is available online, and you can get it free and download it. This one is looking at what we can learn from more documentary evidence. Prior to 1900, the documentary evidence is a lot less available. But now in the 20th century, there's a lot of documentary evidence to see what happens in the Bona Basin with land and water and people.
Excuse me, Bob. You're still on the first page of your presentation. I don't know if something's going on with the presentation.
Yeah, no, we're moving on. We're moving on. This is just all introductory stuff. So what I'm doing is using actual documentary records, and these documentary records come from land records of land ownership in the Bona Basin and then court cases. And what I'm going to do is look at what we can learn about settlers, Paiutes, and I will explain the use of that term as we go along. And developers in the Bona Basin. So what we can learn from land records and court cases. So the land records have a number of tools that we can use. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time showing you what I've learned from the BLM, and then GLO is the General Land Office website. And anybody can access that, and it's quite a wonderful website. But to use that website and to do some analysis, other than doing some genealogical work, we need to know about the way in which the entire U.S. has been divided up into townships and ranges, what plat maps are, are. And for those of you who have read any of Dave Carl's stuff, these are von Schmidt's lines. I've used land records from the Mono County land records up in Bridgeport. There's Bureau of Indian Affairs land records from the National Archives that I'm going to be using. And there's J.B. Clover papers. We'll get into just a little bit into him that are at the Huntington Library that I've used. And then when you get all of this stuff together, then you put it on maps and try to figure out what's going on. So we're going to start with this website from the Bureau of Land Management and the General Land Office records. And anybody can go to this website and start playing around with it. But what this website has is all of the records of land that was transferred from the federal government to individuals, largely in the second half of the 19th century into the 20th century. And this initial transfer from federal ownership or federal oversight to individuals, these are known as land patents. So they're not deeds, but they're land patents. And so this database only shows the initial transfer of land titles from the federal government to individuals. Now, I put on there my own little gloss on there, which is, how did the federal government get that land in the first place? And that, of course, is the story that I tell in the first part of the environmental history that's on published on the Eastern Sierra History Journal. But it has to do with the ways in which the Kidsaditka were expropriated from their lands. And it was made way for Euro-American settlers and others as well. And that has to do with the surveying and everything else. But it's an important part of the question. So when you go to the Search Documents tab, you get some drop-down menus, and I've just put this in there. I'm looking at California and Mono County. You can search for last name, and then I'm going to get down here to township and ranges as to how to search for these patents. And then at another point, I'm going to show you that there's this drop-down menu that says tribe, and you can search for any tribe. So this covers much of the US, but what I'm looking at is basically only California and Mono County, and then ultimately just the Mono Basin. So when you do this search on Mono County, you get a list. There's 5 pages of names that come up of people who had these first patents that went from federal ownership to private ownership. And I have, we're going to look at the moment at Joseph Bowler, who got his patent in 1872. That is the first recorded ownership and transfer of land ownership from the federal government to private ownership in the Mono Basin. So he's the first one. And many of you know of him, at least from Bowler Canyon. Yes, this is the guy. But if you look at this record, over here is an image, and if you clicked on that image, it would show you the document itself. And I'll show you some of these documents, a Homestead Act document or other documents that transferred land into his hands. And over here we have where the land is located. This is the township and the range. I'll talk a little bit about that more. And this is the specific part of the township and range, and in the section where you can find it. So when you look at his record a little bit more and you scroll down, we've got the description again of where his land is, 1N26E, I'll explain that. But the interesting thing is that if you click these buttons on the map, up on the map will come the township. This is township 1 north, 26 east. And a township is 6 miles by 6 miles, so that there are 36 1-mile square sections within it. And Mr. Bowler is down here in section 33. And I'll show you this a little bit more, but got to go back. This shows you where on a modern map his property would have been located. And this is in fact Boulder Canyon, and this is Walker Creek going up there as well. The other part of trying to figure out what's going on is to use survey plats. And this is the, and you can get these from the web that I showed you. This I downloaded. This is the original survey of Township 1 North 26 East. And this is Lee Mining Creek, and this is Rush Creek, and this is Walker, and this is Parker. Von Schmidt did this in 1856. And again, those of you who read Dave's book on Von Schmidt's lines know a little bit about this. And much of what I'm going to be doing tonight is to focus on this particular section of that surrounds Mono Lake. And I think it's really, to me, kind of poignant and apt that I'm talking to you tonight 2 days after we got an email from the Mono Lake Committee that the State Water Commission has said that the DWP has to fund the restoration of 30 miles of Rush Creek and then several miles of Lee Mining Creek as well. And the point here is really pretty simple, and that is that Rush Creek in particular and Lee Mining have been the focus of life and politics and conflict in the Mono Basin for a very, very long time. And so I'm going to be focusing on this, but I'll give you an overview of it as well. But this is Von Schmidt's pen and ink drawings. And what I did is I cropped it out so you can see it a little bit larger. So here's Rush Creek. In 1856, he called it Lake Creek because it comes out of Grant Lake, which is down here, which was then called Gull Lake. And Walker and Parker are not even named at this point. They're simply something else. But you can see all of these sections. Each of these sections is 1 mile by 1 mile square. And down here is where Joseph Bowler's land would have been. This is Walker Creek, and this is the canyon right here. I didn't draw 395 on here, but if 395 were here, it would be like sort of around here. And of course, Lee Mining is up there. So this idea of dividing up all of the land into townships and ranges is the way the entire United States is surveyed. All land ownership is located on this grid. And if you had an entire grid, you'd see the entire US is underneath this grid. But what I'm going to be looking at, here's Mono Lake, obviously, but you've got 1N26E, 1N27. You've got these townships and ranges surrounding Mono Lake, which are what I'm going to be focusing on. But I like this image because what it shows is metaphorically what had happened in the second half of the 19th century, especially in the Western United States. And that was that an administrative net was cast over all of this land and these peoples and the water and the animals that had been native peoples. And it was claimed by the federal government as US territory, whether or not they wanted to be cast under that net or not. And this net created a whole new set of rules, values, language, institutions, and means of enforcing what this net meant. And that meant courts, police, military, and everything else. So this is not just a surveyor's plat, it's an administrative net cast over the Western US at the end of the 19th century. So when I took a look at all of the land records in Mono County, or actually not in Mono County, there's more in Mono County, but just simply around Mono Lake, from that federal website of the first transfers from land patents. And I just simply totaled them up. So there's 188 total transfers of land from federal ownership to private ownership from 1872 to about 1930. And then I totaled them up. And what you see here is that the large numbers of transfers of land ownership into private hands are in what we would think of as Rush Creek, Lee Vining Creek, and Mill Creek. So these two alone account for nearly 1/2 of all of the transfers of land ownership into private hands by 1930. And then I just did a real quick demographic survey of who owned those lands, who got them. So Euro-American males, and we've got French, we've got Swiss, we've got Italians, we've got all kinds of people who are getting land transferred to them, make up 84% of these numbers. Women, there's women who have land transferred to their name a long time before the feminist movement, and that's about 6%. And then I'll explain why we have Paiute spelled 2 different ways. But 19 individuals counting for 10% of this total, Kudsadika, who had land transferred into their ownership. And this becomes an important part of the story as well. So there's a question of authority. How is it that the feds were able to transfer land into private ownership? And there were basically 3 ways that land became private property in the Bona Basin. There's the Homestead Act of 1862, the Desert Land Act of 1877, which I'll get into in a little bit more. And then there's simply, you could buy it. You could go to the government land office and for $1.50 an acre, you could buy the land. And that also was a transfer. The Homestead Act and the Desert Land Act were a little bit more complicated in that it involved people settling, literally settling on the land. And I'll talk about those a bit more. So why did Euro-Americans come into the Bona Basin in the 19th century in the first place? Largely that was driven by the Bodie boom, and that is the silver and gold mining up in Bodie, which had, by, what is it, 1900, well, 1870s, there were 12 to 15,000 people up in Bodie. And here we are, where's up Bodie? I don't see it on my, gotta go back. Bodie's over here. This map is looking west, by the way, north is over here. And I'm gonna mention Monoville as well. But settlers came in, and to get land ownership under either the federal land, the Homestead Act, or the Desert Land Act, you literally put roots down into some piece of land and showed that you could improve it. That is, by building something on it, by farming it, by moving water to it. And after 5 years, the government land office would send out an investigator to see if you were bullshitting them or if you actually had done that. And if you had done that, then you would get a homestead certificate. And I'll show you a couple of homestead certificates. Maybe I will or maybe I won't. Forgot which I left out. But once land was transferred into private hands, then it became private property, and there was a market for private property, which led to ultimately, in the very early part of the 19th century, a concentration of land ownership. And you may be surprised, but by 1923, there was basically a monopoly of land ownership in the Mono Basin, where one man and his companies came to own nearly all land in the Mono Basin by 1923. And a lot of that is driven by water. And we'll talk about, why is it that there's so many transfers, patents in the Township 1 and 26E? Well, it's because of Rush Creek, largely. Most of the water going into Mono Lake comes down from Rush Creek. So settlers literally settled, and it took them time to be there before they could apply for a homestead certificate, which then transferred ownership into their hands. And then once they had that ownership, they could then sell it to others. And that is, in fact, what happened in the early part of the 20th century. So what I wanted to show here is just a couple of families by the early 20th century that had amassed a fairly significant amount of land ownership. And this is the Farrington and the Matli families. The Matlis, and this is individuals, it's brothers, it's their siblings, it's their wives, right? These are all of the land. We've got Alta here, we've got Jacob here, we've got Jacob here, Alta, Jacob. We've got Christian, Catherine, Peter. You know, we got a lot of Matlis in here. And you know, this isn't one family, it's an extended family that overall came to own about 2,000 acres down here. And then we've got some other Matlis up here that I don't have. They're on, I've mapped them elsewhere. And then we've got the Farringtons. We got Arch and his brother, William. So W.J. Farrington down here had about 2,200 acres, 500 under cultivation, which meant that largely it was alfalfa for 700 head of cattle. And then Arch has about 4,500 acres. And since this is only one township, much of his land is down here on the south and southeast part of Bona Lake that I didn't include in the in this map because there's only so much you can show at one time. And he had about 4,500 acres, according to the 1908 history of Mono County, a large portion of which is set to hay. He also raises a large numbers of cattle. So you can see that that property is beginning to be concentrated through the market in land. The Farringtons are able to go out and buy land. The Matlis mostly are accumulating land through the Homestead Act for the most part. And, you know, these two Matlis, what is that? That's 6,700 acres. You know, in my book, that's a lot of land. It's a lot of land. So all land ownership was not large ranches. You got these pieces of land. Oh, I should say that the Homestead Act allowed you to get 160 acres. And so this is 160 acres, 160 acres, 160 acres. This is 160 acres. All of these are 160 acres that were transferred from the feds to private land ownership. So they're 160 acres. And here we've got the Matlis again. All of these, because all of these people got homestead certificates, all of this land had been improved. Some of them had ranch houses, they had farms, they were growing things. In one way or another, they were improved from their natural condition to be able to get a Homestead Act. And then I'll talk about the Desert Land Act a little bit later. But this is goes up to 1906. And I'm going to show you the next map, which is really interesting because we're going to make a transition to people who the feds called Paiute, spelled with or without an A. Because in 1907, we get a bunch of people who are identified in the records as being Paiute, P-I-U-T-E. And then after 1907, some of these people are identified as Paiute with an A, P-A-I-U-T-E. Some of these names you probably recognize and some you probably don't. But we've got a fellow by the name of Fee Foster here. We've got young Charlie here. He's got 40 acres. John Cluette, Lewis Murphy. Then we've got Bridgeport Tom and Indian George Sam here. All of these are on Rush Creek. And there's one more fellow down here who becomes really important, fellow by the name of Joe McLaughlin, who is a Paiute as well. And then up here we have Henry Jameson, who is a Paiute, who's got land on either sides of Lee Vining Creek. But I'm going to go back for just a second. Now, most of the people, the Euro-Americans, are not getting land that is actually on Rush Creek. Some of them are, some of them aren't. But where do the people who are the native peoples, the Kudzadika, where do they, when they have a chance to get land, where do they buy land? Where do they try to get land? And it is on Rush Creek. Right on Rush Creek. Here's the Narrows. Keenan over here, by the way, I mean, he had, this is the marshland, and the it's a beautiful section. This was all fairly well watered. And then you got Indian George Sam over here on Walker, and you got Bridgeport Tom on Parker. All these folks are getting land through a transfer into their hands and into their ownership. There's a lot more of people who are self-identified as Paiute in Mono County who got land transferred into their hands as well. So these land patents into people who the feds identified as Paiute or Paiute cluster into two time periods. There's 1907 and then 1920 to 1923. And I asked myself, well, why is that? I have no idea what the heck was going on in 1907. Why these people got lands transferred into their hands, I don't know. But in the period from 1920 to 23, what's happening is, and I'll show you this with some really interesting documents, there is a land market, and people are buying and selling land. And some of these folks who got land, some of the Paiutes, identified by the feds as Paiutes, began selling their land. And so they enter into the records as well. So the Paiutes who were getting these land patents were different from the land patents going to the Euro-American whites. These were not outright grants and patents, but they were held in trust for 25 years for them by the federal government. These folks were considered to be wards of the state. They weren't independent individuals, they were wards of the state. And they were given allotments. Now, for those of you who know something about allotments, in 1887, the Dawes Act was passed, which allowed Indians on reservations to have land allotted to them as private property. It had been collectively owned, but throughout the U.S., land was transferred on reservations into individual families' lands. But in the Mono Basin, these were not federally recognized tribes who had reservations. And, you know, we know that also oh so well from the last many years of the struggle of the Kudzadika to get recognition by the federal government as a tribe. But nonetheless, they got allotments. And so I'm still trying to figure this out. But in the Mono Basin, it was called the Office of Indian Affairs at the time, used 2 acts of Congress to make allotments to the Kudzadika here in the Mono Basin. One was an 1865 treaty with the Cheyenne and Arapaho, and another was an 1880 treaty with the Ute in Colorado. And I think we had some bureaucrats who were just being extremely creative with language that Congress used in specific purposes for the Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Ute, say, well, why can't we do that for the people in the Mono Basin? I don't know that. I'm still working on trying to figure that one out. So here are 2 of these records of patents. One to Fee Foster, which was given in May 20th of 1907, and the other is to Joe McLaughlin, May 20th of 1907. And 5 other of those folks that I showed you on that map also got their patents on May 20th, 1907. And I don't know if you can see this. I mean, it tells you where the land is, as described. Got the name Fee Foster, and you got Joe McLaughlin here, Theodore Roosevelt, and here we've got Teddy Roosevelt. I don't know if this is a stamp or if it's an actual signature or not. But these are accessible from that BLM GLO website, not just for these folks, but for all of those 188 people that I showed you. Now, I've chosen Fee Foster and Joe McLaughlin because they continue to be in the records of the federal government in some pretty interesting ways that begin to shed some light on some other things that were going on. So here's a document from the Office of Indian Affairs dated December 4th, 1919. And it's to the Secretary of the Interior. Category is land sales. And it does involve Fee Foster. And this document is dated December 4th, 1919. And I want to read the second paragraph here. The first one just says, this is Fee Foster, and it says what his land is. But here's what's happening. The superintendent of the Office of Indian Affairs, in his report, states that this allottee is 1/2 Indian blood and fully competent to manage his own affairs. In other words, he need not longer be a ward of the state. It is therefore recommended that the commissioner of the General Land Office be requested to issue a patent in fee to Fee Foster for the land described above. When the patent has been issued, it should be sent to this office for delivery. Now, what I want to do is focus on these words, patent in fee. I have no idea why Fee Foster is called fee. I don't think it has anything to do with patent in fee. But a patent in fee means that after this was approved, Fee Foster no longer was an allottee who had the land under control of the federal government for 25 years, but this was now his land outright and free to do with it as he saw fit. He could sell it, he could do anything he wanted with it. So he became part of the land market that was emerging in the Bona Basin. And I'm going to show you, when we get to developers, I'll show you more about the development of the land market. Yeah, this is just a larger, I'm reading this from my screen. And now we get to Joe McLaughlin, a letter dated December 5th, 1923. Now this is really, really interesting. And so I'm going to read some of it. I don't know if you can see this or not. Did I make it get bigger? No, so I'm just going to read this to you. And what Joe McLaughlin wanted to do was to sell his land. And to sell his land, he needed to get approval from the Secretary of the Interior, who controlled the Bureau of Land Management. And so herewith are papers relating to a proposed sale of land included in the allotment of Joe McLaughlin. And here's the description. But I'm going to read these three paragraphs because they're extraordinarily fascinating. This land, here, we're going to start right here. This land was regularly advertised under the regulations, and 3 bids were received as follows: the Sierras Construction Company, C.H. Rudy, and the City of Los Angeles. And I'll show you where McLaughlin's land was. But it gets more interesting than that. The first 2 bidders, as it subsequently developed, represented the Southern Sierras Power Company, which did not see fit to bid in its own name. Well, who is the Southern Sierras Power Company? That's J.S. Kane. That's John Stuart Kane. Okay, but here you go. When it appeared on the opening of the bids that the City of Los Angeles was the highest bidder, the Southern Sierras Power Company commenced condemnation proceedings, which is what the City of Los Angeles did to us in the 1930s, right? In the Superior Court of California for Bona County, naming as defendants Joe McLaughlin, et cetera, et cetera. On these representations, as it appeared that all the bids submitted were inadequate as a consideration for this land, they were rejected by the superintendent and was instructed to re-advertise and give special notice to all parties interested, including the Southern Sierras Power Company, to afford them an opportunity to bid. The land was accordingly re-advertised. The date of the opening bids being fixed at October 15th, 1923, and a bid of $7,500 was submitted by the Kane Irrigation Company, an auxiliary of the Southern Sierras Power Company. The consideration has been deposited in the recommendation of the superintendent that a patented fee, that's ownership outright, be issued to the purchaser, which is Kane Irrigation Company. So Joe McLaughlin sold his land to Kane in 1923. I should tell you, Fee Foster sold his land ultimately to Kane as well, as did nearly all the Paiute land patent owners as well in the 1920s. So that gets us to the part of the presentation on developers. And I saw Vanita and Barry are there. So we're going to be talking a little bit about WD, Wally McPherson. We've got James Stewart Kane, and over here we've got JB Clover. I should say that I haven't begun to digest all of this, but Clover, actually it was his daughter, after he died in 1956, all of his papers, his daughter arranged them, categorized them, and donated them to the Huntington Library in San Marino. And there are 84 boxes of papers and about 100 folios of maps. And about 4 weeks ago, I went down there to start going through these. And I went through the first 7 boxes out of the 84. And I made copies of 1,000 documents having to do with Bona County and the Mono Basin. And I'm just beginning to go through them. So this isn't going to I'll have a little bit from it. I'm going to show you documents that are mind-boggling that I found in the Clover paper. So these guys, they're not settlers. McPherson was an engineer who worked with Kane. Kane made boatloads of money in the Bodie mines. And he's not a settler here. And Clover is a land developer from Los Angeles who comes to buy the lands that Wally McPherson had put together in a particular project. But these are developers. They're not settlers, they're developers. They see the Mono Basin as something to be developed. And what they had were 2 extremely different visions for the future of the Mono Basin. Wally McPherson and J.B. Clover. Clover took over from McPherson in 1918. They foresaw the Mono Basin as a well-watered agricultural and ranching paradise. And what they saw to do this was to take water from Rush Creek and irrigate 60,000 acres of land around Mono Basin. And that would bring in about, if you look at 160 acres for, or actually it's 324 desert land entries, that'd be 180 new farms or so, spread all over here. And this is a map that that Clover actually had made and is hanging in the historical museum. You can see it; it's massive, it's huge. But that was their vision: agriculture, ranching. Kane, and what's he going to do with all of his money? And what does he see? He has a very different vision for the Mono Basin. He sees all of this water flowing into Mono Lake as the basis for hydroelectric development, right? The Rush Creek Hydro Plant, 1915-16. The Lee Vining hydro plant, about the same time. The Mill Creek hydro plant, first in 1911, then it was wiped out in the avalanche. But what Kane saw was that the water was useful because it could be used to produce hydroelectricity. And what could you do with the hydroelectricity? You exported it. Kane put together those 3 electric plants were not burning light bulbs in our neighborhood. This electricity was being exported into the mining districts of Nevada, but also it was being exported all the way down to the Imperial Valley, to the agricultural regions of the Imperial Valley. So if you wonder why our lights go out all the time, because SCE is continuing to push electricity out to the grid and they don't give a damn about whether or not our lights are on, it goes back to 1915, 1916 and J.S. Kane. Right, so that's what Kane saw. And I don't go into this much, but since I'm here, I'm going to go back to this. I have another presentation that I'm going to be doing at the Eastern Sierra Historical meeting at the end of October. That's October, I forgot exactly when it is, but if you go onto the website of the ESIA, you can find out where it is. But I'm doing, that presentation is going to be on the process by which water became commoditized, bought and sold in the Mono Basin. But among the things that's really amazing about what Kane did in 1902 to 1906, he went up to Gem and Agnew Lakes and literally posted on a tree that said, I appropriate all of the water here for my purposes. And he did it all the way up here. That's how Kane got all the damn water and the rights to the water. He simply appropriated it. So, 2 competing visions emerge in the early 20th century. One presented by Wally McPherson and the other by J.S. Kane. Kane, what's the purpose of water and land? Water for power. What's for McPherson and Clover? Water for irrigation. These are competing visions, and they're competing over land and water as resources. And so at least it didn't result in a shooting war between them, but these were fought out in court. Whose vision for Mono County is going to prevail? So there are three legal cases brought in 1914, 1915 by J.S. Kane, and all of them were won by there's the Mill Creek Decree of November 1914, the Lee Vining. This is how it's spelled in the documents, in December of 1914. And then the most important of these decrees was the Rush Creek Decree of 1915. So I'm not going to deal with Mill Creek or Lee Vining, but I'm going to focus on the Rush Creek Decree. This settled debates over who had rights to the water in Rush Creek. McPherson said, I've got rights to the water because I've posted some of these appropriation notices up on Grant Lake and I get all the damn water. And Kane said, I've bought all the land. I get the water that's flowing through my land. And so this was battled out by in the Mono County Superior Court, not by a Mono County Superior Court judge because he was thought to have been biased one way or another, or maybe he could have been bought by whoever was buying him. But it was overseen by a judge by the name of Hancock, who was from Calaveras County on the other side of the Sierras. So here's some of what the land layout looked like in the Hancock Decree, the Rush Creek case. So Wally McPherson was putting together an operation to see his vision of an irrigated and well-watered Mono Basin by creating a company that he called the Rush Creek Mutual Ditch Company. And then as an offshoot of that was another one called the Mono Valley Improvement Corporation, which was actually going to dig the irrigation ditches that he saw that would be necessary. But Wally and the Rush Creek Mutual Ditch Company owned this land. They owned this land. Kane owned all of this land. He bought it in less than 8 years from all the people who had owned it. And so McPherson thinks that he has rights to all of this water flowing down Rush Creek to send out into irrigation ditches that would go out and irrigate all the southern and southeastern parts of Montana. And these lines here are pointing to where he literally posted his notices of appropriation, saying, "This is my water, damn it." And I've got copies of those documents that have been posted. They're in Bridgeport. So what's being fought out then is who has control over the water? McPherson and his irrigation company, or Kane and his ideas of needing the water for hydroelectric power. And then right here in the middle, this is Joe McLaughlin. I couldn't show him before because he wasn't in the township, but this is, well, Rush Creek, or Grant Lake in 1856 was called Gull Lake by Von Schmidt. And here is Rush Creek flowing down here, and it goes right through McLaughlin's property. And the real critical point, I'm not going to go into it here, is right in the corner of this property, which had been owned by a Farrington who sold his land to Kane. So Kane owns this spot. And I'll just simply say, this spot, if you go up to the area south of the spillway, and you walk toward Rush Creek, there's a fisherman's, you can get across Rush Creek on a little walkway. And if you go across Rush Creek on that walkway, and then you head on the road, that you can see here the head gates of the irrigation ditches that are being built. And this is what I call the flashpoint right here. But more on that at the end of October at another presentation, just doing a little advertising here. But you can see that that Kane has bought up most of this. And then you've got the Paiutes, Fee Foster, Young Charlie, John Cluett, Lewis Murphy, and Joe McLaughlin are also involved in this Rush Creek case as to who owns the water. Okay, so just briefly, and I'm going to go through this quickly. Why did all these cases come together at the same time? And that's because the state of California's water rights laws were in absolute chaos. Who held the water? How could they get it? Who had the rights to it? It was a free-for-all. And so the state, through actually this was through an initiative, created the Water Commission and the Water Commission Act of 1913. And what that did is that began to adjudicate the two different kinds of rights that people were claiming gave them the rights to water. The first is what Kane and then Wally McPherson did by appropriation. First in time, first in right. In other words, if you were there first and you posted on a tree or on a rock that this was your water, it was yours. And this was fueled from the gold rush era when water was measured in terms of miners' inches. This was for gold mining, for hydro mining, and for all kinds of other things. And the right was claimed just simply by posting and recording that this is your water near where you're going to divert it from the source. The competing notion was that the owner of land on or bordering a water course has the right to the use of water on such land. In other words, land ownership confers the rights of water rights. And what the Hancock Decree of 1915 said is that riparian trumps appropriation. And who owns the land? Kane. So the courts asserted that Kane's riparian rights were superior to McPherson's appropriation claims. So he had bought up all the strategically located water, parcels of land, and so he was awarded the water rights. And it included all the water stored in Grant Lake. Right? WD, who had posted claims of appropriation in the name of the Rush Creek Mutual Ditch Company, got nothing. No rights to water except that little bit that flowed through the Rush Creek Mutual Ditch Company lands. So Kane's appropriation, this gets a little bit complicated. So why does Kane want land below Rush Creek when all of his water is just simply creating hydroelectric power and it's coming down, it's going through Silver Lake, et cetera, et cetera? Well, he had posted his appropriations of water from Rush Creek, Lee Vining Creek, and Mill Creek based on the dubious claim that he wanted it for irrigation of land for agricultural purposes. And because the land was, some of it was Forest Service land, some of it was, it became very complicated. But it was a dubious claim, but he used it, and he then by 1923, his companies came to own 80% of the land and water rights in the Bona Basin. McPherson and later Clover, who bought the Rush Creek Mutual Ditch Company from McPherson in 1918, plans to bring irrigation water from Rush Creek to the hundreds of investors that they were enticing to come to Bona Basin were based on the, well, ultimately it becomes known as a fraudulent claim that they had rights to water from Rush Creek. In other words, McPherson and then Kane started building irrigation ditches, selling rights to water, but they didn't have any rights to water. So they were selling ditches that were dry. They sold empty ditches, dry ditches. Kane, on the other hand, all of this is from a document that Kane put together in 1923. This shows you his land and all of the land that he's using to irrigate his land. Here's Grant Lake. And his irrigation ditches, I just want to point out one of these, or two of them. This is the main ditch. And this goes down toward 395. And this, if you go down to 395, this is basically the same route that the return creek that DWP has to do to push water back upstream to go into Rush Creek to fill it up again. But these are all ditches that Kane was using to irrigate his land. So the question arises, why in the heck is Kane irrigating when all he wanted was the water for his hydro plants? And there was a lot of investigations of why in the hell he was doing this. He was lavishing vast amounts of water, wasting it on all those lands. There was a report that said the water is used in a wasteful manner. It is necessary for the, here's why. It is necessary for the power company to use the water for irrigation. Otherwise, the water might possibly be diverted by others for irrigation purposes. And those others were the Rush Creek Mutual Ditch Company. And so Kane is just simply drowning the land in water. He's killing sagebrush with it, basically is what he's doing. To keep his water rights for the hydroelectric plants, he had to use the water that he had appropriated for irrigation. Otherwise, he might have lost the rights to the water. He was fought and taken to court repeatedly in the 1920s for that purpose. And in fact, the Mono County Grand Jury was convened in 1921 and issued its report in 1921 over the issue of what the hell is Kane doing? Irrigating water that he's using for hydroelectric. And there were several reports that came out about that as well. So what happened to the McPherson and Clover scheme or their plan? Kane in 1915 had won all the water rights to Rush Creek. McPherson had initially thought, let's build these irrigation ditches and irrigate 60,000 acres. He discovered after the decree in 1915 that he didn't have any water rights. So he sold all of this to J.B. Clover in 1918. And Clover then started digging irrigation ditches with that shovel that's out by the Historical Museum. But what is he doing? He's got ditches but no water. And he has no rights to the water. I'm not going to go into this document over here, which is an interesting document in and of itself. Okay, so what McPherson and then Clover imagined their project was going to do was they wanted to store water in Grant Creek, divert it to public lands east of Rush Creek, and entice investors to come to Mono Basin and by the Desert Land Act of 1877, get 320 acres of land. But the only way you could get land, 320 acres of land, is if you had proof of improvement of the land. And in particular, because it was desert land, you had to prove that you had access to water. So what did Clover say he was going to do? They sold shares in the Rush Creek Mutual Ditch Company to these investors, it started at $25 an acre, then it went down to $6, and ultimately in the 1920s, it was $2 an acre that they could then use as proof, as a basis of proof for the desert entry so that they would get their 320 acres of land. Now, there were two flaws to this scheme. One, Clover and the Rush Creek Mutual Ditch Company had no rights to any water. And the Interior Department, which is where the General Land Office was, continually rejected the project, quote, on the grounds that unappropriated water was not available. Clover appealed, he fought it, he lost. He appealed it to the California Supreme Court and lost, but he kept digging ditches without water and selling stock in the company at least until 1936. You think people who were, let's say, so 320 acres at $2 an acre, that's $640. And they're thinking they're going to get water. Clover's saying next year get water next year. They're not getting any water. You got a bunch of really angry investors. And so what do angry investors do? Well, here we got to do some of the court findings first that put this behind us. Okay, so lower courts, 1915 and 1923, had said that the Rush Creek Mutual Ditch Company has no rights to Rush Creek water. That went all the way to the California Supreme Court, which ruled that a water right cannot exist without imposing a servitude at some fixed point upon riparian land. So that's what Kane had. Clover and the Rush Creek Mutual Ditch Company didn't have it. So it also, another line of challenge went to the U.S. Court of Appeals, which said I love this one. The Rush Creek Mutual Ditch Company, quote, having at the present time no right to water for use in the ditch and reservoir system in question, it would be vain presently to issue a writ overriding lower court rejections of Mutual Ditch Company claims. It is within our discretion not to order a useless act. So they're not going to order a useless act and let the waterless ditches stand. So say, well, okay, so what did the feds know about what the hell was going on in the Mono Basin? And I'm going to say they couldn't get it into court. They knew And I'm going to show you the evidence. They knew that the McPherson Clover project was a fraudulent enterprise. And then I'm going to show you my favorite letters, and we'll be closing pretty soon, and we can have some questions and further discussion. And I'm going to show you why I call these my favorite letters. These come from the Clover collection at that I found at the Huntington Library. And when you read these, think about this. I found these in the hands of J.B. Clover. Okay, so these are in the hands of J.B. Clover. So we have disgruntled investors in Clover's scheme, Mr. Carter and Mr. Ray. And one goes to a fellow by the name of A.A. Wilhelm, who's an inspector for the Department of Interior. This is February 9th, 1927. So this is a guy who's complaining that he's invested, but he hasn't gotten any water. So what does Wilhelm say? It says, Clover and of Aids have been selling water stock for 8 or 10 years, and they know that they cannot deliver water. At different times, the facts have been presented to the General Land Office in Washington, but so far we've been unable to prosecute and convict them for their misrepresentations. It is not believed that the Rush Creek Mutual Ditch Company will ever deliver water. It is unfortunate if you have paid anything for water stock. Okay. Then we've got his boss, a guy by the name of J.H. Favorite, Wilhelm's boss, wrote a letter to another disgruntled investor in December of 1927. And what he says, what Favorite says is, we cannot start action against this man, that is Clover, for obtaining money under false pretenses, as that is an offense against the state laws and must be prosecuted by the district attorney of the state or county in which the offense was committed. As I wrote you before, we endeavored to have this man prosecuted in the federal courts for his activities in connection with the Rush Creek Mutual Ditch Company, but were unsuccessful. So, you know, this is in Clover's files. And so I'm also working on, well, why couldn't they prosecute him? What could they have and what couldn't they have? Oh, I got to get over here and get back to this. Okay, so we're coming to a conclusion rather quickly here. So what? And what I want to suggest here is that, get down to this last one, bullet point here, is that from 1900 or so into and through the 1920s and into the 1930s, there was a rich history of local struggles over Bona Basin water rights, largely involving, on the first part, McPherson, who came up with the idea for the Rush Creek Mutual Ditch Company. And then when he understood that it wasn't going to be successful, he sold it to Clover, who continued to do it and was found to be conducting a fraudulent enterprise. So you got him on the one hand, and then you've got Kane, who is monopolizing the water and wasting it on irrigation as a pretense for keeping his rights to water to generate hydroelectricity. So what happens? So Kane has monopolized land and water rights by 1923. And what does he do with that? He makes an offer to sell all of that to the city of Los Angeles in 1923 for $7 million. Think about it. He had all the water rights and he was offering it to the city of Los Angeles for $7 million. And for a whole series of reasons, as I say, that gambit didn't go through. And this was a secret negotiation. This was not in the papers. We didn't know about this. Yep. And then later, yeah, think about what would have happened had Kane been able to convince the city of Los Angeles, and in particular it was Mulholland who walked away from the deal because he wanted to turn his attention to the Colorado River. If the Bona Basin water rights had been sold to Kane for $7 million in 1923. So Clover he's in his vision for taking all the water from Rush Creek to irrigate 60,000 acres in the Bona Basin. He testifies to Congress that of the 215,000 acre feet of water flowing into Bona Lake from Rush Creek, he was going to divert 185,000 acre feet to irrigation. Think for a few moments about what that would have meant for Bona Lake. And there's other documents. He says, well, if it goes dry every once in a while, we can just fill it up with fresh water from other years. So, I'm going to go back up there. So I think what's really interesting and important about what I'm doing with this environmental history and looking at the history of the Bona Basin, basically from the bottom up and constructing the story going forward, not necessarily with knowing how everything comes out, is that we see a lot of actors and a lot of people whose activities and actions and contributions to the history of the Bona Basin have been overlooked. We've got all those homesteaders. We've got the Paiutes who actually owned land and then sold it to Kane prior to LA. Then we've got Clover saying that he would be happy to drain the Bona Basin, drain Bona Lake if he could get the fresh water to irrigate all of this. And all of this is being struggled out. And among the things that I find quite interesting is that nobody got killed, as far as I know. Although I think Barry once told me that Wally was advised to walk around with a gun, to be armed, just in case something bad happened. Anyway, we've got a rich history here. It isn't all defined by LA taking the water in the 1930s. That's another story. So I'm going to leave it there. Where are we? I went a little bit long, but I'm sorry about that, Robin. So I'm going to close this off and then go to screen. I'm going to stop sharing. Yes? Okay, now I can go to the view and we got the gallery view. There we go. You're welcome.
Absolutely. Bob, this was awesome. It's interesting. I can almost envision you walking around with your arms going around. This was great. I want to check our chats and see where we're at.
Yeah.
Let's see here, just a second. Okay, just a second. We've got, thanks, Bob, for the great research and effort. Barry McPherson said McPherson and then Clover. Frank has a comment. It's not in the chat. Yep.
I would say, bottom line, don't try to sell something you don't own.
It's
wise advice.
It's just amazing. Now here we've got a question from Barry. He says, did Kane plan hydropower plants on lower Rush Creek below the Narrows?
Yeah, there's evidence that Kane was looking at 2 more hydro plants, one below the Narrows, because a dam could be put across the Narrows and a reservoir there, and one could be put on the shores of Bona Lake as well. There were all kinds of reasons why those 2 became difficult to do, and so Kane never followed through on those. But they were spending a considerable amount of time investigating both of those possibilities. And WD thought that was one of the reasons why Kane was keeping his hands around the neck of Rush Creek, is that he wanted more hydro plants.
Okay.
But yeah, Barry, there's documentation on that, and I'll show you. I'll share those documents with you. And WD was part of trying to bring all that out and hold Kane accountable for all of that.
Okay, and then Rhonda and Hank say, so interesting, Bob. Thank
Unmute yourself, Robin.
Okay, let's see. Ron and Hank said, so interesting. Thank you. I'm looking for any more questions. Just a second here. Bob, see my private chat to you, please. So
Okay.
Bob, can you see a chat?
Okay. Okay, so yeah. How do I save the chat?
I don't know, Rich. How do you save a chat?
How do you see the chat? Down at
Save
the
it.
bottom?
Save it.
Rich, can you save the chat?
Yes, I actually will get to all of those. I have access to those tomorrow. I'll send you a copy.
Okay, and I'm looking at the direct message to me. I'm just going to copy that and put it into a Word file, if I can get it up. Okay.
Okay, and then we have one that says, what happened to J.S. Kane in the end?
Okay, so Kane. Well, I haven't gotten through all of his documents yet, but I've got some of them into the 1940s. But he died in 1956. He had a corporation in Los Angeles called the Interstate Construction Company. And he actually had quite a bit of experience with the irrigation ditches in Colorado and elsewhere. And among the things that I need to do is try to track down. He wasn't getting all of his livelihood from Bona Basin and the Rush Creek Mutual Ditch Company. He had a very large corporation in Los Angeles, and I don't know what he actually built or how much money he had, and what he did with it. But ultimately, as I said, he did die in 1956. I think his wife predeceased him, and then his daughter Catherine spent a couple decades pulling his papers together. But I don't really know the end of that story. But it's on my radar.
So that's another talk we can have you.
Yes, it is. What happened to Clover?
That's it. Okay, so we have another that we have from Ron and Hank. If McPherson's vision had happened, would Mono Lake been drained just effectively as LA tried?
Well, that certainly is the implication of what Clover was saying to the Senate in 1931. Now, WD, it's clear that he and Clover are two different people with different interests and with different moral compasses. WD was clearly interested in providing water for settlers, for people who would live here, who this would be their home, that they would take care of it. I mean, he was interested in that. And that's what the Rush Creek Mutual Ditch Company was established for. It was not a for-profit operation. It was to be run by those who lived here, who were coming together to try to get water for their farms and their ranches. Now, WD also fought against Kane into the 1930s. And one of the things that I've come across some papers of his in the Clover papers that make a couple of interesting points. He was fighting Kane and Kane's reservoirs above Lee Vining and then above Rush Creek, because they had shut off the water that had been going into what McPherson called two of the greatest natural marvels in the Eastern Sierra, the Lee Vining Falls and the Rush Creek Falls. Now, I don't know if anybody has any photographs of the Rush Creek Falls before Kane put up his reservoirs and dams up there. But what McPherson tried to do and failed, Barry, this is another story of what WD tried to do and couldn't do. But he said, well, look, why can't we have the falls incorporated into Yosemite National Park and restore the falls? So WD was out there trying to do all of these things, trying to do things for the area. I've never convinced that Clover was interested in doing that. So I don't know. I think WD would have recoiled a little bit at the idea that what he was proposing would have drained Mono Lake. He probably would have come back from it. Clover, he just wanted to take all the water, but he couldn't get it.
Okay, and then Connie Millar is asking, did Kane own lands with a steep gradient, hill slope, that would be necessary for hydro development? It seems his lands were on flat ground.
Okay, so what Kane owned, or actually he had appropriated, and then the feds prevented anybody else from buying, were all of the lands. If you think about Agnew Lake and Gem Lake up above Rush Creek, there's something on the order of a 4,000-foot drop from there down to where the Rush Creek hydro plant is. And it's probably a greater drop from Ellery and Saddlebag Lake up above Lee Vining. And my guess is that up above Mill Creek in, I forgot what lake it is up there, there's a huge drop. And so all that water is coming down to penstocks and 4-foot pipes and turning the turbines there. So right. So, but when it gets down to Silver Lake and Rush and Grant Lake, there's not a whole lot of gradient there. There is some. Would it have been enough to power anything? Don't know. They're talking about building dams 75, 100 feet tall for impounding water. I'm not a hydro engineer. I don't know how much drop you need to create the amount of force necessary to turn turbines to produce electric power. Maybe that's why they abandoned the idea of doing any more on Rush Creek, below the Narrows, below Grant Lake.
All right, and now Ross Keston, and he's from LA. He said, are the ditches that were dug around Mono Lake still there?
Yeah, you can still see evidence of them, and several of the slides I took out show them. But if you go to Google Earth and just focus in on the area a little bit to the north and east of Grant Lake, you can see the evidence of the ditches. Most of those were, I think, the ones that you can see near Grant Lake. Those were Kane's ditches. And then if you go out further east toward the Mono craters, in 1930, Clover was out there around he was around the Bona craters. He was digging ditch out there. And if along 120, if you get to one point where the cones come close to the road, you can see something that looks like a ditch. And if you get out and walk it, which I did, and Barry talked with Barry, he did too. You can see that that's part of the ditch system that Clover was digging as well. So, but yeah, the evidence is still there. You drive from 395 on 120 out toward South Tufa. There's a couple of points where, and one that I can think of immediately, there's electrical lines or telephone lines going across 120. There's a ditch right there that goes right across 120 on both sides. So they're still there.
Ross says, thanks for the information. It's a great presentation, and he's going to be looking for those ditches.
Have fun.
And then Janet Carl asked, did Kane finally sell all his land to LA in the 30s?
Yes, he did. So I've got two proposals. One was that 1923 proposal. Kane basically held out, and his land was not condemned, and LA did not get it through eminent domain, but he sold it for something on the order of over $2.5 million. And the document, Ellen King got me the document. A whole bunch of these just fell into the Mono Lake Committee's hands 6 months or so ago. And she said, "You interested in this?" I said, You bet. But I haven't had a chance to read through it yet. I think it's dated 1936. And I should say one of the other ironies about all of this is that these folks who Clover was fraudulently taking money from, who were getting Desert Land Act land, none of those people would have been included in the actions that LA County, city of LA was taking because they had no water. They got basically screwed out of everything. They had no water, so LA did not condemn their land. They got nothing.
It's just absolutely amazing. Let's see. It really does. Barry says, I don't think Grandpa ever dug beyond the craters, but Clover did.
Probably. I think that's
and then I've got a question. And when you say, like at the Huntington, they had boxes of these documents.
Yeah.
Are they really boxes or are they in microfiche?
No, they're boxes of the actual documents. So,
oh my gosh.
yeah, but they're the Huntington is a world-class archive of documents. I mean, it's not just European, but they have a lot of stuff on the West. And these boxes are archive quality boxes that will prevent the paper from yellowing or withering or doing anything else. And they're kept in climate-controlled vaults. So, I mean, they're not like bankers' boxes that we throw our tax material into. I mean, these are archive quality boxes that are designed to preserve these for hundreds of years.
It's just fascinating.
So a box is about 8 inches deep and 14 inches long, and enough to hold legal size paper.
Wow, that it's just incredible. And then Barry also said, and Kane kept little paper trail of his activities, correct?
Who does?
Kane, did he keep paper trail of his activities?
This is one of the most amazing things that you can think of, is that Kane is this incredibly wealthy man, built Bodie, owned Bodie, but he did not leave a paper trail like Clover did. His partner was a lawyer by the name of William Metzen, his best friend Billy. And I just get the feeling that they ran their business sort of like a criminal enterprise. They didn't want to leave anything in writing. And you think about all the movies we've seen about Chicago and New York and all the criminal enterprises. They're not putting anything in writing. Do me a favor, So, but Kane, I don't know if anybody knows where Kane might have kept any papers. I'd love to know. He left the area and was happier living in San Francisco than living over here. But I have found no evidence of any papers of Kane's anywhere.
Okay. I think that is all of the chats. And thank you so much, Bob.
You're welcome.
This was awesome. The information that you have is, I just think that you could probably give us a presentation maybe a few times a year. Oh, well, we have there's another chat here from Barchet, and he said the grifter spirit is alive and well in U.S. history and always has been. From Bodie heyday to Bona Basin water to the housing boom. Great program.
Well, we historians have fun. I mean, these documents, and what I'm doing, and ultimately I'm publishing all of it, but publishing, I'm making my own narrative. But the documents at some point will find a home in the Bona Basin Historical Society, either in the PDF files that I have, or we'll print them out one way or another. But what we do is you know, you have to take people's oral histories of what their memory is of the past, and you know, compare that with what the documentary record shows and what it can actually reveal. That's more that we have, and then we construct narratives out of that. And so this is the second presentation, and I've got a third one coming up that deals more with water. And then I'm going to be working on getting these into another article. But I see probably 4 articles coming out that ultimately on the Mono Basin alone that will probably make a book at some point. But it's taking me, there's a lot more in the Mono Basin, and so I'll be doing, I'm not going to be, I thought I was going to go up to Bridgeport and then down to Bishop and do a whole lot more in the Eastern Sierra, but there's a lot here.
It is amazing. And you bring it to life for us, and we so appreciate it. And I did want to point out to everyone that Dave Carl put a link to the history conference that Bob is referring
Dave is
to
doing something
in the
too.
chat.
Yes.
And so that is the history conference that Bob has referred to, where the sort of the next series in the talk will be. This has been great. And thank you again
Yeah, you're
so
welcome.
very
It's
much,
fun.
Bob. It's just been wonderful. And hopefully next time we're going to be able to do this in person, and we can see you walking around and waving your arms. It's interesting because I'm waving my arms as you're talking. Because so much of this is just so absolutely awesome. So thank you again so much.
And Dave Carl
And
has his hand up. Dave, you wish
Okay, Dave, go for it.
Well, you got it in, but just so you know, for the rest of Bob's story and others, it's October 30th. That's a Saturday. It's the 6th annual Eastern Sierra History Conference. And if you thought to go to ESIA to find it, it gets confusing because they've got it under Sierra to Forever.org, which, and then Eastern Sierra History Conference. And you have to register. It's a paid fundraiser for ESIA. So all those things. And I put the link there for registration in the chat.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And this concludes the October meeting of the Mono Basin Historical Society. Our November meeting will be the first Monday in November, which is November 1st. And that is where we will have our one of our board of trustees, Chris Spiller, and she's going to be talking about the energetic and amazing McTarnahan. And I'm sure that will be a very interesting talk as well. So we're looking forward to that. And thank you again, Bob. This has been
You're welcome.
Wonderful.
See you all next month.
See you all next month. Thank you. Bye.